So according to white liberal professors, math is racist. Not only is it racist just in general, but it is racist towards a specific group of people, that being black people. That's right, folks. Math is racist to black folks. Now, I wanted to get into a segment out of none other than Professor Brother Dr. Thomas Sowell's book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. And essentially, he breaks this phenomenon down. Now, of course, this is a man who actually has some sense. Therefore, he's able to articulate this message in a way that is not induced with propaganda, virtue signaling, and just plain old unhinged insanity. So that being said, I just want to read this out for y'all, and then we're going to get deeper into the subject. So here it states, blaming others for anything in which blacks lag has become standard operating procedure amongst white liberals. If blacks do not pass bar exams or medical board tests as often as whites or Asians, then that shows that something is wrong with those tests. That's right, folks. Something's wrong with the test. There's nothing going on with the individual taking the test. It is the test itself that has a flaw. So it continues, then that shows that something is wrong with the test as far as many white liberals are concerned. Best-selling author Andrew Hacker, for example, says that academic problems in general are created for black students in white colleges because such colleges use curricula that are white in logic and learning. We're going to get back into this, but let me just break some down. I think white liberals, and I'm going to point specifically to those who call themselves the educated, the elite, etc. I don't think they realize just how deeply racist that sort of mentality is, right? You know, the white student, the Asian student, their logic is different than the black student's logic. That is insane to me. That in and of itself is more racist than I think anything else you could say to one of these kids. Well, you know, the reason you didn't pass your test is because your logic is different than their logic, i.e., you're a different being. That's damn near dehumanizing. But again, that's just me. Let us continue. Yeah, this is a little makeshift bookmarker I made for myself. Just cut out a piece of cardboard. That's how we roll. So we have why this does not seem to be a where we at? Okay. For example, white logic and learning in there. Okay. Why this does not seem to be a problem for Asian students remains unexplained, even though blacks have lived in this white society for centuries longer than either Asian Americans or contemporary immigrants from Asia. Why is it not a problem for blacks from the Caribbean is another unexplained contradiction of such white liberal excuses for African-born blacks. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up in the first place is because too often I hear this argument of, well, you know, when you have these conversations about culture and what it means to be black and, you know, how the said black culture has become nothing more than ghetto culture, at least the mainstream culture. Not saying that all black people are this way. That's actually my bottom line argument, is to say we are products of our environment. We're products of whatever is instilled into us. And at the base is always culture. What is the culture in which we associate with? What is our identity? When you identify with something that says, I don't know, education doesn't really matter, right? When you are raised in a household where you are more likely to be pushed to become an entertainer, you're pushed to become a ball player, and there's nothing wrong with these things. I'm pointing a simple fact out. Logic, this is, I guess, is considered white logic because black logic seems to be different, right? According to white liberal professors. So you have a culture that says, do this. And if you're somebody who, let's say, is an academic, you're scholarly or, you know, entrepreneurial, whatever it may be, right? Outside of the norms of that said culture, then you are seen as an outsider. You're no longer considered black. Like, let's be real. If you are quote unquote black on the outside, but you do not subscribe to those things that are supposed to make you black in culture, then you are no longer considered black. And the danger of that is now you begin to devalue the very same things that would uplift you, right? This book is littered with, multitudes of examples of how the Southern white culture, Southern redneck culture was what made its way into many of the black folks who then moved from the South into the North and brought that with them, or stayed in the South and continued to perpetuate that and owned that idea or owned that culture, owned those customs, from the violence to the promiscuity to, the laziness, the lack of productivity. These were peoples who, let's say, had 70% of, the milk producing cows, yet they only produced 15% of the cheese, and most of it came from the place that didn't even have that many. These are people who are wrapped up in a mind of handouts. Does that sound familiar? And these are white folks we're talking about. So when it comes to this thing of, math is racist, the IQ tests are racist, the overall education system is not built for the black mind, what you're saying is they can't do it. That's what you're saying. Because here we have examples of Ben Carson. And the reason I've been bringing him up as of late is because my wifey and I recently watched a movie called The Gifted Hands, right? And what I noticed from that immediately is that his mother, though she may have not been an educated woman herself and even looked to learn how to read in her later years, was somebody who always instilled that into her children. She wanted her kids to do better and to be better. She didn't want them to be a part of the status quo. And therefore, those kids ended up becoming, who they became. I mean, one of the kids becoming one of the most impressive human beings, I believe, in history. He's one of those guys who will go down in history forever, right? As a neurosurgeon who did some of these procedures that had never been imagined. And yet here was a black man raised in lower socioeconomic environments around that ghetto mentality, but yet his mother did not instill it into him. And therefore he became, a kid who was seen as like dyslexic and having all these learning disabilities, etc., ended up becoming, or at least being seen and perceived as a genius. Now, it didn't necessarily say that he had dyslexia, but he had hard times reading, low self-esteem or low self-belief, and his mother instilled it in him. And he became an adamant reader. That was actually one of his greatest advantages amongst all of his students, whether they be black, white, Asian, etc. So this idea that black folks need a different curriculum, they need a different expression of something in order for them to succeed. They need affirmative action. They need DEI. They need something different is actually the most destructive messaging that you could give to a young black boy, young black girl. That's what's going to keep them in a mentality of I am lesser than. True white supremacy at its core is to say that, everybody around me who is not what I am, or any supremacy, just doesn't have to be white supremacy necessarily, but it says that what I am is better than everybody else around me. And how that manifests, how I see it, is you're lesser than me. You can't do as much as me. You're not as smart as me. You're not as smart as me. Like there's a story of a genuine white supremacist in this book, a man from the South who believed that black students or black people were inferior when it came to mental prowess. And he was essentially trying to test this theory by bringing these black students together. And mind you, this is right after slavery. Right? We're not talking about a few weeks ago, a few months ago, or, a couple of decades ago. We're talking about all the way back, damn near antebellum times. And these students not only performed very well, but they outperformed some of their white counterparts. And this man was forced to revoke his entire belief system. I mean, of course, at first he's trying to come up with excuses, but eventually he got to a place where it's like, well, I have to refute this. And the only way we continue to break that stigma is to not carry forward this thing that has not been serving us, that has been so destructive. These behaviors, these thought patterns that we have come to accept as being black are some of the most destructive when it comes to progress. Again, what good is it going to do when you tell a kid math is racist, don't do math? It's a white construct. Oh, by the way, you should get a leg up. We're going to give you a program that's going to push you forward, bump you forward, even though you're not you're not putting your best effort in. In my last years of high school, my junior and senior year was my worst years of high school because I had really checked out. I did not give a single damn. Surprise, surprise. I wasn't reading. I wasn't doing anything that I'm doing now. I did not admire intellectualism, right? I was given over to that ghetto mindset, ghetto culture. And one of our guidance counselors was trying to push me to get into a university. And she said something and it stuck with me. Mind you, this is in the Bay Area. So a lot of this white liberal sentiment is spewed in everything, even in the religious schools. So she pulled me aside and she said, you should be looking to go to a college, university. And I had no intentions of doing so. And I kept on saying, well, maybe a JC, maybe a junior college, maybe a junior college. And she kept pushing. And it's like, well, even though you have the grades you have right now, which was barely cutting passing, barely. I'm talking about there is a teacher who left the school and only gave me a 70% because it would no longer be there. I would have probably had like a 60, 58% in that class. So I was barely cutting it. You understand me? Barely C's, etc. And yet here she is trying to push me to like Michigan State or somewhere where I could go in order to pump up those numbers. And I realized in hindsight that they were going to give me a leg up. Here are all, my white and Asian counterpart students, whether they're like Chinese American or Indian American or everything in between. Here they were fighting to get into these schools. And here I was about to get a damn handout and some charity on top of it. Imagine that. Now imagine I'd gone through, now I'm feeling myself. I'm an educated black man. And I'm going through life and reality hits me. Because the thing with math, what that's interesting is you can't pretend it. It's like one of my mentors, Coach Bobby Bluford, used to say, when it comes to some like a deadlift, right? You can't fake it. You have to go through it. A squat. You can't fake it. You have to go through it. There's some exercises you can fake it all day long. Math, you can't fake it. And so when you go into the real world and the marketplace shows you your true value, you can't fake it. When all of a sudden the real economy starts to show itself instead of, this extremely woke and quote unquote progressive economy that rewards people that have no sense of merit. When the real world shows, the government starts doing 100,000, 200,000 layoffs, and you're no longer just getting a job because you fill a quota and criteria, reality strikes. And unfortunately, the people who suffer most from that are the ones who believe that they were getting an advantage in the beginning. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Now, if you'd like to stay around, make sure to click that little subscribe button down there, or you can show some love by going to the description below and clicking on the button titled Buy Me a Coffee. Leave a little something there, or click on the Cash App. Leave a little something here. Till the next time, peace.
I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking. A 3-6-5, that's a full rotation. I see you looking up, you know them constellations. Constantly gazing like house of praises, you get to praising.